3 weeks before the wedding, her ex posted a throwback photo from a trip she said she took alone. The date? Exactly when I was out of town. I asked about it. She said, "You're being paranoid." So I asked her maid of honor. She didn't say a word, just sent me a screenshot. I canceled everything before sunset. 3 weeks before the wedding, I was sitting in my office reviewing vendor contracts when my phone buzzed. Social media notification. Normally I'd ignore it, but something made me look. Her ex-boyfriend had posted a throwback photo from some mountain hiking trip. Beautiful scenery, that smug smile of his I remembered from college parties. But what made my blood freeze wasn't his face. It was the timestamp. The photo showed the exact dates I'd been in Chicago for that emergency work conference 6 months ago. The same weekend she told me she needed alone time to clear her head and went on a solo retreat to reconnect with nature. She'd even sent me selfies from what looked like the same trail, talking about how therapeutic solitude was for her mental health. I stared at that photo for 20 minutes. Maybe it was an old picture he was reposting. Maybe the timestamp was wrong. Maybe I was losing my mind from wedding stress. 3 years together, engaged for 8 months, and suddenly I'm questioning everything because of one stupid social media post. But the more I looked, the more details jumped out. She was wearing the new hiking boots I'd bought her for her birthday 2 weeks before that trip. The same boots she said she wanted to break in during her solo adventure. The same blue jacket she'd packed specifically for that weekend. And there they were, arms around each other, grinning like teenagers who'd just gotten away with something. I called her during my lunch break, trying to keep my voice steady. Asked about her weekend plans, casual conversation, then slipped in a question about that hiking trip from months ago. Her voice got tight immediately. She started talking fast about how much she'd needed that time alone, how it helped her realize how much she loved me, how she couldn't wait to marry me. The more she talked, the more my stomach churned. That evening, I brought it up directly. Showed her the post on my phone. Her face went through about 5 different expressions in 2 seconds. Surprise, guilt, anger, then this weird calm that scared me more than anything else. She said I was being paranoid, that her ex was just posting old photos to mess with our relationship because he couldn't handle seeing her happy, that the timestamp must be wrong because social media was glitchy like that. She even laughed, this forced little sound that didn't reach her eyes, and said she couldn't believe I'd accuse her of lying about something so ridiculous. But here's the thing about being with someone for 3 years. You learn their tells. The way she touches her neck when she's nervous. How her left eye twitches slightly when she's crafting a lie. The way she over-explains simple things when she's covering something up. And right then, she was doing all 3. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly that I almost convinced myself I was seeing things that weren't there. We had a wedding in 3 weeks. 200 guests. A venue that cost more than my car. Her dress hanging in our closet like a white ghost, reminding me every morning of the promises we were supposed to make. That night, she was extra affectionate. Made my favorite dinner, suggested we watch that movie I'd been wanting to see, kept telling me how much she loved me and how excited she was to be my wife. It felt like she was trying too hard, like she was overcompensating for something. But I played along because the alternative was admitting that everything I thought I knew about my life might be a lie. The next morning, I couldn't concentrate on anything. Kept staring at that photo, analyzing every pixel like I was some kind of digital forensics expert. I even called the Hiking Trails Visitor Center to ask about their policy on photo timestamps, pretending I was planning a trip. The ranger laughed and said their trail markers had QR codes that automatically embedded location and date data when people scanned them for social media posts. No way to fake it. That's when I knew I had to dig deeper. But I also knew I couldn't do it alone. Her maid of honor was someone I'd known longer than I'd known my fiancé. We'd all gone to the same college, ran in the same circles. Helen was one of those brutally honest people who couldn't lie if her life depended on it. She'd been the one to introduce us at that party junior year, claiming we were perfect for each other. If anyone would know the truth, it would be her. I called Helen that Friday afternoon, asked if she wanted to grab coffee. She suggested this little place downtown where we used to study during finals week. The moment I walked in and saw her face, I knew she'd been expecting this conversation. She was fidgeting with her coffee cup, not making eye contact. Asked how wedding planning was going with this forced cheerfulness that made my skin crawl. I showed her the photo without saying anything. Just slid my phone across the table and watched her reaction. Her face went completely white. She stared at the screen for what felt like forever, then looked up at me with this expression I'd never seen before. Like she was in physical pain. I asked her directly, did she know about this trip? Was my fiancé lying to me? Helen closed her eyes and took this shaky breath. Then she pulled out her own phone, fingers trembling as she scrolled through her photos. found what she was looking for, and turned the screen toward me. It was a screenshot of a text conversation between her and my fiancé from that same weekend 6 months ago. My fiancé had sent her a selfie from what was clearly a hotel room, not a hiking trail. The message read something about how guilty she felt, but how this was something she needed to figure out before the wedding. How she couldn't marry me without knowing if her feelings for her ex were really over. But that wasn't the part that made my vision blur with rage. The next message was her asking Helen to cover for her if I called asking questions. To say they'd gone to a spa together or something believable. To help her protect what we had because she knew this would destroy me for no reason. Helen had refused. Told her that if she was having doubts, she needed to be honest with me. That I deserved better than lies. The conversation ended with my fiancé getting angry, saying Helen didn't understand how complicated love could be. I stared at that screenshot until the letters started swimming together. Helen was crying now, apologizing over and over, saying she should have told me months ago, but she kept hoping my fiancé would come clean on her own. She'd been carrying this secret like a weight, watching me plan a wedding with someone who was lying to my face. But Helen wasn't finished. She had more screenshots. Apparently, this hadn't been the only time. There were messages from other weekends when I'd been traveling for work. Times when my fiancé claimed she was visiting her sister or having girls' nights, but was actually meeting up with her ex. Helen had screenshots going back almost a year, documenting lie after lie after lie. The worst part was reading how calculated it all was. My fiancé wasn't some confused woman making impulsive mistakes. She was planning these meetings, crafting elaborate cover stories, recruiting people to lie for her. She'd turned our entire relationship into some kind of elaborate deception, and I'd been too trusting to see it. Helen showed me photos from parties I hadn't attended, work events where my fiancé had brought her ex as her plus one, while telling me she was going alone. There were restaurant receipts she'd saved, credit card statements showing charges from hotels on nights when she claimed to be sleeping at her friend's apartment. The evidence was overwhelming, but Helen saved the most devastating piece for last. A voice message my fiancé had sent her just 2 weeks ago, right after we'd sent out the wedding invitations. Her voice was slurred, like she'd been drinking, and she was rambling about how she didn't know if she was marrying the right person. How she still had feelings for her ex, but felt trapped by all the wedding planning and family expectations. In that message, she said something that hit me like a physical blow. She said she loved me, but she wasn't sure she was in love with me anymore. That maybe she never had been. That maybe she'd just been comfortable and scared to be alone. I sat in that coffee shop listening to the woman I'd planned to marry question our entire relationship while asking her friend to keep lying for her. Helen was sobbing openly now, apologizing for not telling me sooner, saying she'd been hoping it was just cold feet and my fiancé would work through whatever she was feeling. But there was still more. Helen had been doing some investigating of her own over the past few weeks, feeling guilty about keeping secrets. She discovered that my fiancé and her ex had been in contact almost constantly throughout our entire relationship. Not just occasional friendly texts, but daily conversations, intimate messages, photos they were sharing with each other. Helen showed me screenshots from social media posts where my fiancé had shared inside jokes and memories with her ex while I was sitting right next to her on the couch. Times when she'd liked and commented on his posts within minutes of him posting them, like she was constantly monitoring his activity. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. My fiancé had never really ended things with her ex. She'd just gotten better at hiding their relationship while building a life with me. I was the safe choice, the one who looked good on paper, the one her family approved of. But he was the one she actually wanted. As I walked back to my car, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock the door. 3 years of my life. 3 years of planning a future with someone who was planning a completely different future behind my back. 3 years of believing I knew someone who turned out to be a complete stranger. That weekend, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I was going to spy on my own fiancé. The thought made me sick, but I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. Helen had shown me enough evidence to know something was seriously wrong, but part of me still hoped there was some innocent explanation. Saturday morning, my fiancé said she was meeting her sister for wedding dress shopping. Something about final alterations that couldn't wait. She kissed me goodbye and told me not to wait up because they might grab dinner afterward. Normal Saturday couple stuff. But I knew her sister was out of town that weekend because she'd posted photos from a work conference in Denver on Friday night. So I decided to follow her. I felt like a creep, sitting in my car outside our apartment building, waiting for her to leave. When she finally came out, she wasn't dressed for dress shopping. No way you're trying on formal, wearing ripped jeans and a t-shirt. She got in her car and drove toward the opposite side of town from where the bridal shop was located. I followed her for 20 minutes, staying far enough back that she wouldn't notice. She pulled into the parking lot of a hiking trailhead about an hour outside the city. The same trail from that throwback photo her ex had posted. My stomach dropped as I watched her park and check her phone, then get out and start walking toward the trail entrance. 5 minutes later, another car pulled up. Her ex got out, and they ran toward each other like something out of a movie. He picked her up and spun her around, and she was laughing in a way I hadn't seen in months. They kissed right there in the parking lot, and it wasn't some quick peck between friends. It was the kind of kiss that made everything else disappear. I sat in my car watching the woman I was supposed to marry in 2.5 weeks kiss another man with more passion than she'd shown me in our entire relationship. They held hands as they walked toward the trail, talking and laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. I waited in that parking lot for 4 hours. When they came back, they were both flushed and happy, carrying a picnic basket I'd never seen before. They sat on the tailgate of his truck sharing food and talking intimately, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. It looked natural, comfortable, like they'd been doing this for years. Which, apparently, they had been. I followed them to a hotel about 10 miles down the road. Watched them check in together, laughing at something the desk clerk said. The same hotel where Helen's screenshot showed my fiancé had taken that selfie 6 months ago. They weren't even trying to be creative about their deception. I went home and did something I'd never done before. I went through her things. Really went through them. Found a shoebox hidden in the back of her closet that was full of letters, photos, and mementos from her relationship with her ex. Not just old stuff from before we met, but recent things. Movie tickets from dates they'd gone on while we were together. Love letters he'd written her last month. A jewelry box containing a necklace I'd never seen her wear. At the bottom of the box was a notebook where she'd been writing what looked like diary entries about her feelings. Page after page of her talking about how confused she was, how much she still loved her ex, how she felt trapped in our relationship, but didn't know how to get out without hurting everyone. One entry from 3 months ago made me physically sick. She'd written about how she was going through the motions of wedding planning, but fantasizing about calling it all off and running away with her ex. How she wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life by marrying me. How she felt like she was living 2 completely different lives and didn't know which one was real. The most recent entry was from the week before. She'd written about how guilty she felt lying to me, but how alive she felt when she was with her ex. How she'd never felt that kind of connection with me, no matter how hard she tried to convince herself otherwise. How she was terrified that if she married me, she'd spend the rest of her life wondering what if. I sat on our bedroom floor surrounded by evidence of her double life, reading about how the woman I loved had been lying to me about everything that mattered. Not just the big stuff, but little things too. Places she claimed to go, people she said she was with, feelings she pretended to have. Sunday morning, she came home with this elaborate story about the dress fitting and dinner with her sister. She even had takeout containers from her sister's favorite restaurant as props. She kissed me and asked about my weekend, acting like the perfect loving fiancé while I sat there knowing exactly where she'd been and what she'd been doing. I realized that everything about our relationship had been performance art. She'd been playing the role of happy girlfriend, then loving fiancé, while living a completely different reality behind my back. Every time she said she loved me, every time she talked about our future together, every time she acted excited about the wedding, she was lying. But I still wasn't prepared for what I found when I checked her phone that night. She'd left it charging in the kitchen while she took a shower, and for the first time in 3 years, I looked at her messages. What I found there made everything else look like innocent mistakes. She had been planning to leave me. Not eventually, not someday if things didn't work out, but soon. There were screenshots of apartment listings she'd been looking at with her ex, messages about job opportunities in other cities where they could start fresh together. Conversations about how to break up with me in a way that wouldn't make her look like the bad guy. The most devastating part was a message thread from the night before, right after she'd gotten back from their hotel rendezvous. She was telling him how much she loved him, how she couldn't wait to start their real life together, how being with me felt like acting in a play where she'd forgotten her lines. She had been planning to leave me at the altar. Not literally, but close enough. The plan was to go through with the wedding because canceling would cause too much drama and hurt too many people, then quietly separate a few months later. Make it look like we'd grown apart naturally instead of admitting she'd been cheating the entire time. She was going to let me marry her knowing she was planning to leave. Let our families spend thousands of dollars on a wedding that was a complete lie. Let me stand up in front of everyone we knew and promise to love her forever while she was already planning her exit strategy. That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with someone who'd made some mistakes or was going through a rough patch. I was dealing with someone who was capable of elaborate, long-term deception without any apparent guilt or remorse. Someone who could look me in the eye every day and lie about the most basic facts of our life together. I had to get out, but I also had to be smart about it. Because if she was willing to lie about this much for this long, there was no telling what else she might be capable of. Monday morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day planning. Not planning a confrontation or some dramatic showdown, but planning my escape from a relationship that had been built on lies from the beginning. I needed to protect myself legally and financially before everything exploded. First, I went to the bank and moved half our joint savings into a separate account. We weren't married yet, so legally I was entitled to half of everything we'd contributed equally. Then I called our wedding venue, florist, caterer, and photographer to ask about cancellation policies. The financial hit was going to be brutal, but not as brutal as spending the rest of my life married to someone who didn't want to be married to me. I also did something that felt completely crazy but turned out to be the smartest decision I made. I hired a private investigator. Not to follow my fiancée around or gather more evidence of her cheating, but to make sure I understood the full scope of what had been happening. If she was this good at lying about major things, I needed to know what else I might have missed. The PI was a middle-aged woman who specialized in matrimonial investigations. She looked at the evidence I'd already gathered and told me I had more than enough to end the engagement. But she also warned me that people who were capable of this level of deception often had other secrets. She suggested we do a comprehensive background check to make sure I wasn't walking into any legal or financial surprises. What she found over the next 48 hours changed everything I thought I knew about the situation. My fiancée hadn't just been cheating with her ex-boyfriend. She'd been running what amounted to a con game on both of us. The PI discovered that she'd been telling her ex that she was planning to leave me for him, while simultaneously telling me that she wanted to spend the rest of her life with me. But she'd also been hedging her bets in ways I never could have imagined. She had been in contact with 2 other ex-boyfriends from college, maintaining emotional and sometimes physical relationships with them as backup options. The PI found hotel receipts, restaurant charges, and even vacation photos that proved she'd been cheating with multiple people throughout our entire relationship. But the really shocking part was the financial angle. She'd been using credit cards in my name to pay for her affairs. Romantic dinners, hotel rooms, gifts for her various boyfriends, all charged to accounts that I was ultimately responsible for. She'd also taken out a personal loan using our joint assets as collateral without telling me, supposedly for wedding expenses, but the money had actually gone toward funding her double life. The PI also discovered that my fiancée had been lying about her job situation. She'd been telling me she was getting promoted and making more money, which was why she could afford her share of our expensive apartment and wedding costs. In reality, she'd been laid off 6 months ago and had been funding her lifestyle through credit fraud and by borrowing money from her various boyfriends, including her ex. She'd been playing all of us, telling each guy whatever he wanted to hear to keep the money and attention flowing. To her ex, she was the love of his life who was trapped in a loveless engagement. To me, she was the devoted fiancée who couldn't wait to start our married life together. To the other guys, she was probably telling completely different stories about what she needed and why. The most disturbing discovery was that this wasn't her first time running this kind of operation. The PI found evidence that she'd done something similar with a previous boyfriend in college, maintaining multiple relationships simultaneously while planning her exit strategy from each one. There were even online forum posts where she'd bragged anonymously about her ability to manipulate multiple men at once. I was dealing with someone who saw relationships as games to be won rather than connections to be cherished. Someone who got off on the thrill of deception and the power of controlling other people's emotions. The woman I thought I'd fallen in love with didn't actually exist. She was a character my fiancé had created to get what she wanted from me. Wednesday evening, exactly 3 weeks before our wedding date, I confronted her. Not with accusations or drama, but with documentation. I laid out printouts of everything the PI had found. Bank statements showing the fraudulent charges. Screenshots of her conversations with multiple men. Photos of her with her various boyfriends. The notebook from her closet where she documented her real feelings about our relationship. I told her I knew about everything. Not just the obvious affair with her ex, but the whole elaborate web of lies she'd been spinning for years. I asked her if there was anything at all, about our relationship that had been real. She tried to deny it at first, then got angry and accused me of violating her privacy. When that didn't work, she broke down crying and begged me to give her a chance to explain. She said she'd been confused and scared, that she really did love me, but didn't know how to handle her feelings for other people. She promised she would cut off contact with everyone else and be the wife I deserved. But I wasn't buying it. Someone who could lie that consistently for that long didn't suddenly become honest because they got caught. Someone who could commit credit fraud and financial manipulation to fund their affairs wasn't someone I could ever trust with my future. I told her the engagement was over, that I was moving out that night, and she had 1 week to figure out her living situation before I terminated our lease. That I'd already started the process of canceling the wedding, and that she needed to inform her family and friends herself. I wasn't going to do her dirty work or help her spin the story to make herself look better. The conversation lasted less than an hour. By sunset, I was loading my stuff into a rental truck while she alternated between begging me to reconsider and threatening to make my life miserable if I left her. I didn't care about her threats. After everything she'd put me through, her anger felt like confirmation that I was making the right choice. Someone who really loved me and regretted their mistakes wouldn't respond to being caught with more manipulation and intimidation. I spent that night in a hotel, staring at the ceiling and processing the fact that 3 years of my life had been built on lies. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. 6 months later, the ripple effects were still spreading. My ex-fiancee's carefully constructed house of cards collapsed completely once I stopped propping it up. Her ex-boyfriend found out about the other men she'd been seeing and ended their relationship. The guy she'd been borrowing money from started demanding repayment when they realized she'd been playing them too. She had to file for bankruptcy within 3 months of our breakup. All those credit cards she'd maxed out in my name became her responsibility once I provided the fraud documentation to the banks. She ended up having to move back in with her parents and take a minimum wage job to try to pay off her debts. Helen and I stayed friends, but she carried guilt about not telling me sooner for a long time afterward. I had to convince her that her ex-friend's choices weren't her responsibility, and that keeping those secrets had probably been more painful for her than it was for me. The private investigator told me that my case was one of the most elaborate relationship frauds she'd ever encountered. She said most cheaters were impulsive or emotional, but my ex had been running what amounted to a criminal enterprise. She suggested I consider pressing charges for the credit fraud, but I decided I just wanted to move on with my life. I lost about $15,000 between the wedding deposits and the fraudulent charges, but I considered it tuition for a very expensive education about trust and red flags. It could have been much worse if I'd actually married her and discovered all this during divorce proceedings. The hardest part was rebuilding my ability to trust people in relationships. For a long time, I found myself analyzing every conversation and looking for hidden meanings in normal interactions. It took therapy and time to realize that not everyone is capable of that level of sustained deception. 2 years later, I met someone new. Someone who was transparent about her feelings and her past, who didn't play games or create elaborate stories to cover her tracks. Someone who understood that love means honesty, even when the truth is difficult or uncomfortable. We've been together for 3 years now, and I proposed last month. This time, I know it's real because I've learned the difference between someone who says they love you and someone who actually shows it through their actions every single day. My ex tried to contact me a few times over the years, usually when she was having financial or relationship problems. I never responded. People who are capable of that kind of sustained manipulation don't change just because they get caught. They just get better at hiding what they're doing. The whole experience taught me that the biggest betrayals aren't usually sudden explosions. They're slow burns, tiny lies that accumulate over time until you realize you've been living in a completely different reality than you thought. The key is learning to trust your instincts when something feels off, even if you can't prove it yet. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones we know the least. And sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is discovering the truth before you make a mistake you can't undo. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.